All right, here's a shorter one about standards of practice that I suppose I could have started off with in this little video series. But home inspectors in Alberta are not required to follow a standards of practice. So, a standards of practice is a set of guidelines of what the home inspector should be doing and things they don't have to do. And the reason for a standards of practice is so consumers, clients can get a pretty standardized home inspection no matter who they hire because they kind of know what to expect, right? They kind of know the scope of what this person's going to do for them. And that helps them in hiring a home inspector who they've never met for the most part, right? So that's the purpose of the standards of practice. And the standards of practice is just a series of rules of things that home inspectors have to do and things they don't have to do. Now, you can go above the standards as a home inspector. When you go above the standards, you're opening yourself up to liability. But you can do that. You're not supposed to go under the standards of practice, although it can happen, right? It can happen by accident or it can happen on purpose or whatever. I would say basically you're just not allowed to go below the standard, but I would imagine if you went below the standard 1%, it might not be that big a deal. If you go below the standards 50%, that's a huge deal. You're not you're not doing your job. So be careful about at least meeting the standards of practice and then exceeding it. Again, the standards of practice is a set of things you have to inspect and don't have to inspect. So as a home inspector. So if you're required to inspect XYZ, then you better make sure you do that and you report on it and you tell the client about it and it's in your home inspection report. And if you're required to report on something and you can't for some reason, like let's say you are required to inspect the attic space and you can't go in the attic because the door doesn't exist. There's no door to get into the attic. Then you still have to put it in your report because you're required to report on it. So then you put it in your report as a limitation. You say, I wasn't able to get into the attic that day because I couldn't find an attic hatch. Okay, cool. Now, you got to be careful about those limitations too, because if you say there wasn't an attic hatch, then you better be sure there wasn't. Because if they find one in a closet somewhere and you said there wasn't access to the attic, then you didn't look around very good, did you? And you could say, well, they just made that hatch, but maybe the hatch looks really old and it's obvious that it's quite old and it's been there a long time. So you want to be careful about just, you can't, as a home inspector, you can't just go in there and be like, well, there's no attic access, whatever. I'm just putting it in the report. Now I don't have any liability for that. No, you still have the liability for it. You're just noting that you don't have access to it. So you better hope there isn't actually access to it. You want to be correct about your limitations as well. Throwing a limitation in isn't like a get out of jail free card. But yeah, that standards of practice is very important for consumers. And in Alberta, we have licensing, we have mandatory insurance, all these things. And you know what we don't have? Mandatory standards of practice. It's a very laughable thing. I'm sure if any home inspectors from Texas are watching this, you're thinking, what the hell? Because Texas is highly regulated. They have just an outstanding system down there. Here, we don't have that. I've talked to the government about it several times, and there's no requirement at all. For me, this is part of the reason why I'm not involved in local home inspection organizations like APHIS in Alberta. I was a member of CAPI when CAPI was here, but let's be honest, these organizations don't do anything for us. They really don't help us. They don't they don't really educate us either. They're kind of pointless. I mean, home inspectors don't even have to follow a standards of practice. So what's the organization doing about that? Nothing. I don't know, maybe they're lobbying to get it approved, maybe they're not. It's been, as long as I've been doing inspections, it's been a decade, more than a decade. So I haven't done anything in 10 years. I don't know how hard they're trying. Why would I want to be a part of an organization that's not trying to do anything like that? I don't want to give them my money. I don't want to pay that membership fee. It's pointless. But that's just my own personal opinion about it. But yeah, no standards of practice in Alberta. So when you're hiring a home inspector, or you're referring a home inspector to your client as a realtor, then you might want to ask them, do you follow a standards of practice? What is it? What standards of practice do you follow? Why do you follow it? How strictly do you follow it? Whatever, right? Maybe ask them a few questions about that, because if they're not following any standards of practice, who knows what they're doing? Like, every inspection could be completely different. I mean, obviously, if you refer somebody and every inspection is completely different, you're not going to use them very much. I get it. But technically, every inspection could be like just different, and who cares, right? Because I'm not required to meet any standard. I never told you I was meeting any standard. For me personally, I follow the InterNACHI standards of practice because I think InterNACHI is a really good organization. It's in the States. They do a lot to help home inspectors. They do proper training. They do ongoing education. They do lobby the government for more rules and regulations around home inspections. They're helping. They're actually doing something. So I do pay their membership fee, and I do participate in their stuff, and I do follow their standards of practice because it's pretty good, and it makes a lot of sense for consumers, and it makes a lot of sense for home inspectors, and it's a very detailed and well thought out set of standards. So that's what I follow. That set of standards in my home inspection report is kind of itemized out per section. So we got like the roofing section, the exterior section, the landscaping section, the heating section, the cooling section, etc. In each of those sections, there's a header that tells you the standards of practice. So then you could literally look at the report and then look at the standards of practice and see if I'm following the standards of practice. Is this guy reporting on all the stuff he's supposed to be reporting on? Is he doing what he promised he would do? So the client can see that on every inspection report, and they can see if I'm, doing a reliable, thorough home inspection. So that's how I operate. Certainly not everyone operates that way. A lot of people do. I'm not putting down all home inspectors for sure. It's just we don't have to follow a standards of practice. And as a realtor and as a client, you should keep that in mind when you're looking for a home inspector, that it's not all equal out there.